Welcome to this explainer here on French with me. If you've ever wondered why French looks so elegant on paper but sometimes feels like a puzzle to actually use, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're diving into the absolute mechanics of the French language. We're going to break down everything from how basic sounds map directly to meanings, all the way up to the beautifully logical patterns hidden behind those famously intimidating grammar rules. Whether you're a language enthusiast or an absolute beginner curious about how human communication is built from the ground up, I promise you, by the end of this, it's all going to feel a lot more intuitive.
Let's start with a really fun question. We often think words are just random sounds we humans arbitrarily assign to objects over time, right? I mean, a table is a table just because we all agreed to call it that. But is it possible that phonetic sounds themselves carry inherent, almost secret meanings? What if the physical way a sound feels in your mouth actually influences what that word means? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go through today's explainer.
To get from those tiny sounds to the big grammar rules, we've got a clear roadmap. We're covering sounds and iconic words, the art of Verlan, navigating noun plurals, mastering compound nouns, and finally, avoiding common pitfalls. This will make sure we don't get lost as we travel from the abstract world of phonology straight into the concrete rules of spelling.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Sounds and Iconic Words. This is the micro level of linguistics, where we are zooming all the way into the very building blocks of spoken French.
To truly understand French tome, our morphosyntax sources explain that we first have to isolate the absolute smallest pieces of sound. In phonology, we call this a phoneme. It's literally the smallest unit you can isolate by segmentation in spoken language. And when we string these phonemes together, we get syllables. Take an open syllable. It ends in a pronounced vowel, like the word ami for friend. Notice how your mouth just stays open on that final E sound. A closed syllable on the flip side ends in a pronounced consonant, like in viennent, meaning they come, where the sound is suddenly stopped by that consonant. Recognizing these structural building blocks is step one to decoding the language.
Now, this structural view actually challenges some pretty traditional linguistic thought. For a long time, the granddaddy of linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure, championed this idea of the arbitrary sign. He argued that the sound of a word is totally randomly associated with its meaning. But cognitive science shows us another side of the coin, which is iconicity. This is when the sound actually imitates its meaning. The most obvious example? Onomatopoeia. In French, the sound a cow makes is mieux, which directly gave birth to the French verb for mooing, meugler. The sound literally is the meaning. How cool is that?
And this brilliantly illustrates the cognitive science behind iconicity on an even deeper level. Our sources notice not just animal sounds. The high-pitched, tight sound I naturally evokes a sense of petiteness or lightness in the human brain. Conversely, an open, low sound like a cognitively evokes greatness, wideness, or heaviness. Think about it. The sounds themselves are triggering psychological associations. It completely proves that language isn't just random, it's deeply wired into our human biology and perception. Which brings us to Section 2, the art of Verlan. We're going to see how this phonetic foundation we just talked about is actively twisted in everyday French culture to create a highly popular form of street slang.
To an outsider, Verlan might sound like total linguistic chaos, right? Just random syllables thrown together. But as our EduScholar source shows, it's incredibly systematic. You can actually deconstruct it into a strict three-step morphological formula. Step 1, you take a word like louche, which means shady, and you add a silent E to the end, making it louchou. Step 2, you literally invert the syllables, flipping louchou into che-lou, and boom, che-lou, a super common French slang word for weird or shady. Step 3 sometimes involves truncation, or basically chopping it short. Take femme, meaning woman, add the E for femma, invert to moufa, and chop off the end to get mouf. Honestly, it's like mathematical poetry. Okay, transitioning from the really malleable, living nature of spoken slang, we've got to tackle Section 3, Navigating Noun Plurals. This is the macro level of rules for written French.
The crucial takeaway here is pattern recognition. French grammar has this tough reputation, but I promise you, it's incredibly structured. Instead of relying on rote memorization for every single word, you just need to look for standard, predictable patterns based on how the noun ends. For example, nouns ending in "al" almost always shift to "os" in the plural. Nouns ending in "ile" become "ales." Nouns ending in "a" or "o" take an X instead of an S. And here is my absolute favorite rule. If a word already ends in an S, X, or Z, you literally don't do anything at all in the plural. It stays exactly the same. So simple, right? Well, that's straightforward enough for single words. But what happens when we smash two completely different words together? Welcome to Section 4, Mastering Compound Nouns, which is essentially a logical grammatical puzzle.
As classic grammar resources like the Becherel demonstrate, forming the plural of a compound noun isn't about guessing. It depends entirely on deciphering the underlying meaning of its individual parts. You kind of have to put on your detective hat and become a bit of a linguistic investigator here.
You have to literally deconstruct the word to find the logic. Let's look at the French word for hummingbirds, oiseau mouche. The literal translation is bird flies. If we're talking about birds that resemble flies, both elements are nouns, right? And because you have multiple birds and they resemble multiple flies, both oiseau and mouche take a plural marker. It makes perfect logical sense when you just break down the definition.
Identifying what grammatical elements actually make up the compound word gives you the exact clues you need to figure out the spelling. The golden rule is this: adaptable words, like nouns and adjectives, can be pluralized, but rigid structural words, like verbs, adverbs, and prepositions, never take a plural marker. So if a compound word contains a verb, that verb stays singular no matter what. Oh, and additionally, words borrowed from foreign origins, like talkie-walkie, usually just completely ignore French pluralization rules and stay invariable. Good to know.
All right, this brings us to Section 5, Avoiding Common Pitfalls. Specifically, we're looking at the case of the missing N. This is a sneaky grammatical trap that regularly trips up even native French speakers in their daily writing.
The whole issue lies in the invisible negative. Look at the affirmative phrase, on a oublié, meaning we forgot. Now look at the negative phrase, on n'a aucune raison, meaning we have no reason. Because on a and on a sound completely 100% identical when spoken out loud before a vowel, it is so ridiculously easy to forget that negative N apostrophe when you're writing it down. Our grammar sources tell us you have to actively look out for negative context clues in the rest of the sentence. Words like aucune for none, or pas for not. When you spot those clues, you'll realize that a sneaky N apostrophe is absolutely required in writing, even if your ears can't hear it in speech.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've seen how French builds from these tiny, meaningful sounds up to some pretty rigid spelling rules, and yet it still allows for the playful mathematical slang of Verlan. So, do the strict mechanics of French grammar limit creativity, or do they actually provide the perfect, sturdy tools needed to endlessly reinvent this living, breathing language? Once you know the rules, you know exactly how to play the game. Thanks so much for joining me here on French with Me. Keep questioning the mechanics of the language, and I'll see you next time.